Life is a climb. It's not always easy, and there are many struggles along the way. But don't give up. Don't allow yourself to be defeated, because God loves you, and He will protect you. Allow Him to be your strength. Lean on Him, and don't trust in your own understanding. Let Him carry you when life gets difficult. Keep the faith. And remember, no matter the circumstance, obstacle, or challenge, He is with you.
Hello. I hope you are having a very good day today, and I'm certainly hoping that spring will soon begin to spring. Right now it's not sprung very well. It's still cold, but it's March, right? So I want to take the opportunity to engage you with a few sessions during our midweek discipleship study series, and just to kind of explore and talk about some of the issues that folks bring up that are criticisms or questions, or that people are cynical about our faith, about our walk with Jesus, and about believing in God and all that. And so I'm going to just bring to you 4 or 5 sessions, just some of the questions that arise, and the hope of this is that it may not give you all the answers, but it may strengthen you in responding to someone that you know who might be asking these very questions or similar questions. So it's helping us, in a way, defend our faith. Now, I understand we don't need to defend God. He does perfectly fine with defending Himself. But sometimes God places us in a situation or a relationship, right, in which we are the only Bible that people will read, and in which we have that kind of friendship and closeness and mutual respect with somebody else that we can enter into these kind of discussions, and maybe just one little thing I might say might strengthen the response that you might form in engaging those questions with the people that I believe God puts into your life. That is not a persecution. That is an opportunity to share Him. So one of the questions that people that are more cynical or doubtful about the viability or legitimacy of our walk with Jesus is simply this: is Jesus just a crutch? Is Jesus just a crutch? Have you ever encountered someone in your life who has said this to you, or has said something like this to you? You know, they just see Jesus as a crutch, and the emphasis is on the word just. Or maybe they don't use those exact words, but perhaps they have said or indicated that they feel that Jesus is really just for the weak. And it's okay if people really can't handle life, and so they decide to depend on Him. Or they might feel or say something like, Jesus is just for those who can't find their own way to face life on their own. I think in some ways they are kind of a re-expression, if that's a word, of the thought pattern of a very famous humanist, and that's what they are proposing, is a humanist view in which we should be strong enough that we don't need God. And a very famous humanist, and actually the pioneer of the communist form of government, you know him, Karl Marx. I mean, you don't have lunch with him, but you know him, you know who he is. He said this: religion is the sigh of the oppressed creature, the heart of a heartless world, and the soul of soulless conditions. It is the opium of the people. It is a necessary fix, if you want to put it that way, because we can't handle life any other way, so we invent religion. And I know there's a difference between religion and faith, but he's talking about God too. Another Christian cynic has said, religion is nothing but a chloroform mask into which weak and unhappy people stick their faces. So he's not saying Jesus is a crutch, but it's pretty much the same thought pattern. And that thought pattern basically falls within the line of humanism, that philosophy in which we've got everything we need to handle life on our own, and we do not need God. Have you ever run across that type of encounter? Jesus is a crutch, or we don't need God, or he's just for the weak, or if you got to have a crutch and you want to call it Jesus, well, that's okay, I guess. And let's not rule out the possibility, as I'm speaking to you via this media, that perhaps someone in the very hearing of my voice this morning or this afternoon or this evening, whenever you listen to this, might actually be saying, and they might be listening because this is actually you. You're not listening to see how you can form a response to somebody like this, but this may actually be you, and this may actually be how you feel. And you know what? If it is, I certainly welcome you with open arms to this discussion and these thoughts that I'm sharing. Or maybe you aren't all that way, but you're teetering. And maybe you are kind of. Maybe you are sort of there in your thinking and you're considering. Maybe you find yourself tolerating this religious stuff that maybe you're new to exploring, and you kind of get that some people just need to appease themselves with Jesus, and you accept that, but you still think it's because they do not want to deal with the harsh realities of life, and therefore they cop out and hand it off to an invention or a convenient religion, and they'll call it Jesus. And maybe you're okay if some people just get carried away with this following Jesus stuff. I mean, because, hey, at least it keeps them out of trouble, right? I mean, what harm is there in faith in Jesus, if that's what you need? So anyway, I don't know where you fall. If you're looking for how to respond to other people who bring these concerns to you, these questions, is Jesus just a crutch? Or if it is you, I don't know where you are in that, but to help us form a response to this preconception or this assertion that Jesus is just a crutch, I invite you to let's explore together why some say Jesus is just a crutch. What do people really mean in saying this? Well, sometimes it's just an expression of frustration and anger because they haven't yet discovered a relationship with Jesus or decided to enter into that relationship with Jesus. So sometimes it's frustration and anger, but there's a logic behind it because we're all thinking people. And here is my personal understanding of why some say Jesus is just a crutch. Okay, I'm going to share this with you. And I think here's what they are really saying. I believe people who assert that Jesus is just a crutch are saying that Jesus is just an aid to use when we feel we need him. You know, people just want to lean on something. That's our nature. And when life gets tough, we just want to lean on something. We grab somebody, we lean on something. And so some people pick Jesus because they are not able or strong enough to support themselves. I think people who say Jesus is just a crutch are saying that following Jesus is a sign of personal weakness. And it's indication that we are avoiding taking personal responsibility in facing the challenges we encounter in our own lives. So we're weak. That's why they equate weakness and crutch together. You lean, you get support. So in this session, we are trying to determine, or I'm trying to share with you, how we as imperfect but genuine, real deal disciple followers of Jesus respond to this assertion. How do you? How have you in the past, or how will you if you've never really encountered this kind of confrontation or discussion or dialogue with someone up until now? Is Jesus just a crutch? I'm going to share with you my personal response. Now understand, it may not be the exact personal response that you already have or that you will come up with as you think about this in this session. You know, there are actually many responses we can bring to this discussion, and to some extent, they will vary as much as the number of folks who engage this discussion. But it is my hope that as I offer my approach to this question and it's a question of skepticism, my friends, as I offer you my approach to this question of a skepticism concerning Jesus, I'm hoping you might find some nugget to strengthen your own response, because a lot of our responses will be based on our own personal testimony and experience with Jesus ourselves. And when and if the time comes that you find yourself in this dialogue with someone that God has placed in your path, I am hoping that in your journey, as you encounter an increasingly skeptical world that is getting stronger around us, you will be able to give a hope a reason for the hope that lies within you. So is Jesus just a crutch? My response: yes, Jesus is a crutch at times, but not just a crutch. And that's the biggie. Emphasis on the word just. Jesus is a crutch, but not just a crutch, because he is far more than just a crutch. Much more, so much more than just a crutch. We do not know him, and we do not experience him if that is all we see him and experience him as. But I ask you, okay, yeah, so Jesus is a crutch. Is a crutch really such a bad thing? Or is it more accurately something that we need when we are broken in some way? Let me ask you, is going to the doctor a bad thing? Or is going to the doctor something that there are times we need when we are broken beyond our own capability and ability to heal ourselves and get better? Do we go to the doctor all the time? No, we go there when we need to, or at least we should. Is that a bad thing? You see, a crutch is not intrinsically a bad thing at all. If it were, man, we'd be condemned. We need to go out, and all the people that are using crutches, we need to chastise them, right? You're weak. Get rid of that crutch and quit walking, crawl. I mean, it's silly, isn't it? A crutch is not an intrinsically bad thing. There are times when even the strongest among us actually need something to help us, something to lean on. And none of us will ever escape or avoid that scenario at some time in our lives. And some of us live in that scenario more frequently than we care to, but it's a result of living on planet Earth. You know, if you have a broken leg or ankle, Does it not make sense to use a crutch or a wheelchair? Is that even worse? So you can still get around, right? Without hindering the healing process going on in your broken leg. If you didn't use a crutch, then you would probably do further damage. A crutch is to help us when we are broken. Is turning to Jesus when we are broken such a bad thing or a nonsense move? Isn't it the same way if we actually have a broken leg? Is it a terribly nonsensical move to use a crutch while we need it? So a crutch protects your injured leg to give it time to heal before it will bear the weight of your body once again. Is that a bad thing? Is approaching Jesus like that a bad thing with other areas of brokenness in our lives? Does it not make sense to lean on Jesus in your brokenness while you are healing? Is that a bad thing? Well, if it is, then I'm all in. If Jesus is a crutch, then hey, I'm going to lean on him. So be it. Is it really wise, my friends? Or is it in any way beneficial or healing to refuse or choose to avoid using a crutch or other such aid when your leg is broken or you are broken? Is the use of a crutch really an indication of weakness? Or is it really an indication that you're not giving up, that you are purposely and wisely choosing to pursue healing and restoration of that in you which is broken? You're not just going to lay there and say, oh, woe is me, I can't move, my leg's broken, and I'm just going to quit, and I'm going to depend on others, and that's it. No, when you use a crutch, you're saying, hey, I'm going to heal, and I want to keep going. Crutch enables that. Is that a bad thing? Are you really showing strength and not weakness when you use a crutch? And are you really showing strength in that you are helping yourself in any way when your leg is broken, and then you refuse to use a crutch because you're so strong and so you can walk on it anyway? Yeah, try that. That is not called strong, that's called foolish. Not being judgmental, but seems to me that would be foolish. It would seem the broken leg would only get worse if you avoided the crutch. And the pain would certainly not subside, I'd bet the farm, and quite honestly, you would probably wind up being as much of a pain to others as you will be to yourself. You see, a real deal follower of Jesus, growing in him, will and does intentionally seek the offer of Jesus to support us in our brokenness. 1 Peter 5, 6 and 7 says, humble yourselves, therefore, under God's mighty hand, that he may lift you up in due time. Cast all your anxiety on him because he cares for you. You see, a crutch is something that we submit ourselves to depend upon. And as we do that, we can find ourselves a new source of strength that goes beyond us. So is refusing to acknowledge Jesus as a viable crutch to support you in your brokenness really a sign of strength? I don't need him. Or is it more accurately an indication of stubbornness and potentially destructive pride? Jesus is a crutch to help us in and through our brokenness. Yeah, this is true. He's a crutch on steroids, actually, without apology, okay? We come to Jesus driven, actually, by our need. It is our need. We come to him as beggars, and he offers freely his grace without requirement to bring healing to us. We are driven by our need to be restored and redeemed from the impact of our brokenness. And we do lean on him when we realize we cannot help ourselves just on our own. Destructive pride is when you are broken and you continue to think that you can fix yourself when in fact you can't. Matthew 11:28-30 says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Jesus makes healing and restoration possible. In fact, Scripture tells us that when we lean on him, we actually find strength, more strength than we had before. And we actually find healing, better, more complete healing than we could possibly bring to ourselves. And we can experience real restoration of strength and purpose and empowerment. Paul is speaking of his own brokenness and weakness. It was a thing, if you will recall, that he referred to as his thorn in the flesh. It was just something that he couldn't fix on his own. He couldn't come up with any home remedies. He couldn't concoct any means of managing or dealing with this. It was constantly there. And so he's leaning on Jesus, okay? And the way Jesus helps him is a little different than what he wanted or expected, but it enabled him to have the power to endure whatever that thorn in the flesh might be. 2 Corinthians 12:9-10 says this, "But he said to me," and he's referring to God, after repeated times he's asked God to take this thing away, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, in difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am strong." Okay, so to me, the response that we can give as followers of Jesus Christ to the assertion that might be made that Jesus is just a crutch, I think our response can be, yes, he is, but, and this is important, not just a crutch. He is so much more than that. Jesus as just a crutch does not begin to define who and what Jesus is living in us. In fact, when people become real deal followers of Jesus, they tend to get rid of the lesser crutches that they may have been leaning on, crutches that aren't in any way comparable to Jesus. Instead of Jesus, many lean on crutches made of substance abuse, alcohol, or more money, or more power, or more pleasure, or escapes of various and sundry description. What Jesus does is he empowers and renders other lesser crutches totally unnecessary. Jesus has this real habit, and I like this about him, of casting away other far lesser crutches that we may choose simply because we don't need them anymore and they are no longer necessary. Jesus is a crutch, but he throws away all the lesser crutches that aren't doing us any good. Jesus enables us to walk without those lesser crutches that may never, my friends, and often don't, bring healing or restoration that only He can bring to your life. You see, the intent of using a crutch, is it not, is to one day reach the point where you no longer need the crutch. My understanding of God's Word and my personal experience of Jesus living in me, and actually it's the same experience of any real deal follower of Jesus. Here's my understanding. Jesus is very much interested in not just being your crutch, but He is greatly interested in empowering and enabling you so that He is no longer just your crutch, but He's your source of new strength and growing capability. Mark 2:11 says, I tell you, remember Jesus, this is just one of the many encounters Jesus had with the disabled, the ill, the sick, the demon-possessed, the blind, the deaf. Mark 2:11 says concerning a man who couldn't walk, I tell you, get up, take your mat, and go home. And he got up and took his mat and walked out in full view of them all. Isaiah 40:29-31 speaks to His empowering desire in us. He gives strength to the weary and increases the power of the weak. Even youth grow tired and weary, and young men stumble and fall, but those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint. And then in Philippians 4:13, we read, and this is in response to a growing list or a list of challenges in living for Jesus in a world that's challenging. In Philippians 4:13, we read, I can do all this through Him who gives me strength. So, wrapping this up now, if someone presents to you, let's say tomorrow, or maybe you're in the midst of this now, if someone presents to you the assertion that, Jesus is just a crutch, or if you are in that place right now in your own personal life, Jesus is just a crutch for the weak and needy, I would encourage you to engage them or engage yourself and invite them or yourself to consider the perception of Jesus as just a crutch does not match up with the biblical presentation of who Jesus is. That is a description or perception of Jesus that does not match up to who He says He is. Doesn't match up to Jesus' own demonstration of who He is. And it doesn't match up to the experience of the countless numbers across the span of time that have chosen to trust in Him and follow Him no matter what, even in some very, very challenging environments. You see, Jesus is a crutch, but He's so much more than just a crutch. And then I would encourage you in that dialogue as the Lord directs. I would encourage you to invite them or yourself to bring the brokenness to Jesus and find out for yourself or themselves who Jesus really is. Don't go on somebody else's perception. Go on what you find face to face with Him as you lean on Him. And I think you will be amazed. Hey, this is Pastor Rick. I'm with Bethel Community Church, privileged to be lead pastor there. And I would encourage you, if you have some further questions or you want to go deeper in this dialogue and you would want a personal conversation with me, hey, no judgments, but I would love to discuss this with you. Call me, text me, let's get together for coffee, tea, whatever, and we can talk it through some more. Because I am convinced that Jesus is a crutch you want, a crutch you need, but he's much more than that. And that, my friends, is not a bad thing. May the Lord be with you and bless you in the days ahead.